The Arizona sun was burning away the last illusion of my life. At 65 years old, I was the Ohio retiree who traded 40 years of work and a perfect marriage for the empty silence of the desert. Helen's betrayal wasn't with another man, but with the future I built for her. I ran away with my Airstream, the Wanderer, with no destination, feeling empty inside. But the desert, by breaking my engine, taught me a brutal and simple lesson. The man who knew how to fix trucks finally knew how to fix himself.
The Arizona sun was bleeding across the horizon, painting the scattered clouds with shades of burnt orange and deep purple. The desert silence was total, so vast and heavy it felt like it had a physical presence, broken only by the low whistle of wind against my Airstream's aluminum shell. I was standing outside with my old truck's hood up, doing the simple, methodical task of checking the oil. The dipstick came out clean, the level perfect. There was a small point of order in a universe of chaos. Inside the Wanderer, my trailer and now my only home, a faded photo sat on the small Formica table. In it, Helen and I, 20 years younger, were smiling in front of the same trailer, freshly polished and full of promises. Her smile in the photo was like a knife in my chest, a relic from a time when I believed our maps pointed to the same destination. Now the vastness ahead of me didn't seem scary or empty like it did in the first days. It seemed honest. The desert doesn't pretend to be what it's not. It doesn't make promises it can't keep. And in that brutal honesty, after a lifetime on the road because I had to be, I was, at 65 years old, finally starting to find a strange kind of peace.
My retirement party a few months ago was the first clue. The house in Ohio, which I paid for with 4 decades of early mornings and countless miles on the road, was full of people. But they were her people. Friends from her book club, neighbors she had coffee with, couples from her gardening group. I moved among them, a smiling stranger at my own celebration, shaking hands and accepting pats on the back from men whose names I forgot as soon as I heard them. Helen was the center of attention, radiant, telling stories about our future plans. I just nodded, feeling the weight of 40 years on the road making me invisible inside the walls I built. Later that night, after the last guest left, we lived out the scene that had kept me sane during the last years of work. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the kids did their homework, and spread out the maps. They were old, worn at the folds, coffee-stained. They were the script for our happily ever after. "First, we'll head west, Art," I said, my finger tracing the line of Route 66. "I want to see the Grand Canyon at sunrise. I want you to see it." I was genuinely excited, like a kid on Christmas Eve. Helen smiled, but the smile didn't warm her eyes. It was the same polite smile she gave the guests. "Sure, honey, it'll be wonderful," she said, but her gaze drifted to her phone buzzing on the table. She picked it up, her thumbs moving quickly across the screen. "It's just Marge setting up tomorrow's card game." I felt a stab of irritation, a familiar feeling I always buried. This was supposed to be our moment, the beginning of our dream. "Helen," I said, trying to keep my voice light, "can we focus on the maps for just tonight?" She sighed, a sound heavy with a tiredness I didn't understand. "Art, we have our whole lives to look at these maps. They're not going anywhere." She put the phone away, but her attention had already gone with it. She was physically there, but her mind was somewhere else, in a world she'd built during my long absences, a world that had no room for a trailer and an open road. I gathered the maps slowly, my earlier excitement wilting into quiet sadness. I folded each one carefully, feeling the worn paper under my calloused fingers. I told myself she was just nervous. Such a big change in routine after so many years, it was normal to feel a little scared. I held on to that explanation like a man holds on to wreckage in the sea. That night, lying in bed next to her, I stared at the ceiling in the dark and felt a cold that didn't come from the window. For 40 years, the image of her waiting for me at home was the light that guided me through dark roads. But for the first time, I wondered if, while I was running toward home, Sue wasn't quietly running in the opposite direction. I felt like a fool, the man who paid for the dream his wife secretly hated. For 40 years, I was running home. Now, she was running the opposite way. Have you ever ignored your gut feeling because you desperately wanted to believe a lie? Comment below. What was your biggest warning sign that you ignored? Leave a like, subscribe to see what I found in my garage that proved I wasn't just being paranoid.
The house seemed like her territory, but the garage was mine. It was a sanctuary of familiar smells, oil, metal, and wood dust from small projects. My tools hung in perfect outlines on the wall, a testament to order and purpose. And in the center, taking up most of the space, was the Wanderer. I kept her polished, tires inflated, ready for the road. I spent more time here than in the living room, feeling more at home among engines and wrenches than among the cushions and picture frames Helen chose. The discovery didn't come from a forgotten phone or a note in a pocket. It was colder, more bureaucratic. I was looking for the title to an old boat I planned to sell, digging through a file drawer we rarely opened. Among appliance manuals and expired warranties, I found a folder with bank statements from an account I didn't recognize. Curiosity, an emotion I rarely felt, poked at me. I opened one of the envelopes, and there it was, in black and white. Monthly transfers, consistent, to a name I vaguely knew. Mark Renshaw, one of the men from Helen's golf club. There was no explosion of anger, just a cold that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips, leaving them numb. I sat on a wooden crate, the statement shaking in my hands. Suddenly, everything made sense, like engine parts clicking into place. The distracted smiles, the ever-present phone, the tiredness in her voice when I talked about our plans. It wasn't nervousness, it was boredom. I was an old project she was eager to file away. I didn't confront her in her kitchen. I waited. A few hours later, she opened the garage door, a forced smile on her face. "Art, dinner's almost ready." She stopped when she saw me. I wasn't working on the trailer. I was just sitting there, in the middle of my violated sanctuary, holding the piece of paper. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked her in the eyes and asked, "How long, Helen?" She didn't try to deny it. She didn't even have the decency to cry. She just sighed, the sound of a long, tiring performance coming to an end. "A few years," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "But Art, you don't understand. It's not just about him." She gestured to the trailer, the Wanderer, gleaming under the fluorescent light. "I don't want this. I don't want to spend my golden years at a campground eating canned food. I have a life here, friends, a house, a life I built while you were away." Her words were more brutal than any confession of an affair. The betrayal wasn't just with another man. It was with the very foundation of my life. Every mile I drove, every night I spent in a cheap motel, every missed birthday, it was all to build a dream that she secretly hated. I looked at my calloused hands, the hands of a worker who thought he was building a future. In that moment, in the cold garage, next to the trailer that was a monument to a great lie, I understood. I hadn't just lost my wife.
I'd lost the purpose of my entire past.
The dinner she prepared sat untouched on the table. We moved through the house like ghosts, the air thick with unspoken words. There were no screams, no broken dishes. The truth, once released, was so absolute there was nothing to debate. It was like a terminal diagnosis. All the anger I should have felt was buried under the weight of deep, crushing sadness. I looked at her, the woman I'd shared my life with for over 40 years, and saw a complete stranger. That night, I lay in bed next to her for the last time. Each of us stayed on our edge of the mattress, a chasm of silence between us. She pretended to sleep, her breathing regular and forced. I kept my eyes open, staring at the darkness, and the decision formed, not as a thought, but as a physical certainty. I couldn't stay. Staying would mean dying a little each day, haunted by the vision of my crumbled dream. The house, the furniture, the garden she loved so much, none of it was mine. They were just parts of the set for her life. Around 3 a.m, when the house was completely still and the moon cast pale shadows through the window, I got up. Moving with the stealth of a thief in my own house, I didn't take anything from the bedroom. I went downstairs and straight to the garage. The fluorescent light buzzed when I turned it on, illuminating my true home. The wanderer was there, patient, waiting for a trip that would now have a completely different purpose. I started loading the trailer, methodically, in an almost religious silence. These weren't the things of a life together, but the artifacts of my solitary life. My toolbox, the most complete and well-maintained of my possessions. A pile of worn jeans and flannel shirts. My road maps, no longer a script for dreams, but a guide for escape. I filled the small refrigerator with what was in the garage fridge: water, some cheese, a few beers. Lastly, I grabbed the shortwave radio my father gave me, an object of pure nostalgia. Each item placed inside the trailer was a vote, a step away from her and a step towards something unknown. I wasn't packing for a vacation, I was packing for a new life, one I hadn't planned and didn't want, but was now the only option. The whole process took less than an hour, the efficiency of a man used to loading and unloading trucks. The final moment was the hardest. I hitched the Wanderer to the back of my truck, the sound of metal clicking into place echoing in the silent garage. I got into the driver's seat and turned the key. The V8 engine came to life with a low, familiar rumble, a sound that always meant departure. I took one last look at the dark house, the silhouette of a lifetime of work and sacrifice. I didn't feel anger, just a deep emptiness. I wasn't leaving a house, I was leaving the ghost of an idea. With the sun starting to brighten the eastern horizon, I put the truck in drive and drove away, without a destination, just a direction, away.
The first days on the road were a blur of gas stations, greasy diners, and the hypnotic monotony of asphalt. I drove on autopilot, powered by a basic need to put distance between me and the life that had imploded. Ohio gave way to Indiana, which became Missouri, then Oklahoma. I barely saw the landscape change. My mind was a blank screen, the initial shock protecting me from the full pain. But the desert, as I would discover, doesn't let you hide. I was somewhere in northern Arizona, on a stretch of U.S. Route 89 that seemed forgotten by God and men. The noon sun was an anvil in the sky, heat shimmering on the road ahead of me. That's when it happened. A sharp crack under the hood, followed by a high-pitched groan, and then the silence of the engine dying. The truck slowed to a stop, the heavy trailer pushing me onto the gravel shoulder. White smoke started rising from the hood's gaps. For a moment, panic grabbed me hard. I looked in all directions. Nothing. Just saguaro cacti like silent sentries and the relentless vastness of the desert. My cell phone had no signal. I was alone, miles from anywhere. A 65-year-old man with a broken heart and a broken engine. The metaphor was so cruel and obvious it almost made me laugh. I felt the vulnerability of my age, the fragility of my situation. I was just an old fool, running from his problems, about to be swallowed by nothingness. But then something older and stronger took control. 40 years on the road had taught me one thing: panic doesn't fix an engine. Self-pity doesn't fill a radiator. I got out of the cab, the heat hitting me like a wall. I opened the hood, the smoke now a thin vapor, and the smell of burnt antifreeze filled the air. A radiator hose had burst, dried out by heat and age. A simple problem, but one that, under the wrong circumstances, could be a death sentence. I went to my toolbox, my portable sanctuary. I found a roll of high-pressure repair tape and pliers. The work was slow and brutal under the scorching sun. Sweat ran down my face, dripping onto the hot engine and evaporating with a hiss. My fingers, not as nimble as before, struggled with the stubborn clamp. But with each turn of the pliers, each inch of tape wrapped around the burst hose, I felt the panic retreat, replaced by an intense, familiar focus. It took almost 2 hours. When I finished, I was covered in grease, soaked in sweat, and completely exhausted. I used emergency drinking water to refill the radiator, knowing it was a temporary fix, good enough to get to the next town. I got back in the cab, turned the key, and the engine caught, coughing at first, but then settling into its familiar rumble. In that moment, leaning on the steering wheel, looking at the empty road, I was no longer a betrayed husband or a lost retiree. I was a mechanic, a survivor, a man who, when faced with breakdown, knew exactly how to get his hands dirty and fix what was broken. That broken engine in Arizona was the turning point. A mechanic doesn't panic, he fixes. I traded the panic of betrayal for the focus of calloused hands. Leave your like if you believe the best therapy is honest work, even when you're hurting. Comment now. What was your biggest problem that only manual work solved? The wanderer's aimless journey finally has a purpose. Subscribe to see how the desert gave me something nobody on Wall Street can have. Peace.
I limped into the next town, Flagstaff, with the patched engine holding steady. Finding a repair shop and buying a new hose was the easy part. The real change happened inside me. That baptism by fire in the desert had burned away the layer of victimization that covered me. I was no longer drifting. I was navigating. The journey, which had started aimlessly, began to gain a new kind of purpose. From that day on, the nature of my journey transformed. I was no longer looking for the fastest route to nowhere. Instead, I started following the back roads, the thin, winding lines on my old paper maps. I wanted to see the places that time forgot, the small towns the interstate highway made obsolete. The rush had left me, replaced by a patient curiosity I hadn't felt since my youth. My interactions with people changed too. Before, I'd just fuel up and leave, head down. Now I let myself talk. I exchanged stories with a Vietnam veteran at a gas station in New Mexico, listened to an old farmer talk about the drought at a diner in Utah. These were simple conversations,
about the weather, the road, the price of gas. Nobody asked about my past, and I didn't offer. I was just Art, the guy with the old Airstream. This anonymity was freeing. Instead of just passing through the big national parks, I started stopping. I spent 3 days at Zion National Park, not at the main campground, but at a more isolated spot. I left the wanderer behind and hiked. I followed trails that wound alongside rivers and climbed through red rock canyons. The physical effort cleared my mind, and the monumental silence of the rock formations put my own problems in a new, humbling perspective. My pain, which seemed so big in my small Ohio suburb, was just a tiny echo in the vastness of geological time. It was in Zion that I bought a cheap notebook and pen. I started writing a logbook. It wasn't a feelings diary. I wasn't that kind of man. It was a practical record. October 14, Zion National Park. Temperature dropped to 45 degrees after at night. The truck's transmission is making a weird noise in second gear. Need to check the fluid. But between the notes about mechanics and weather, something else started to appear. Saw a condor flying over the canyon today, almost 10-foot wingspan. Silent. Writing about what I saw outside forced me to pay attention, to be present. The constant buzz of betrayal in my mind started to be replaced by the sound of wind in the pines, by the sight of a starry sky without city light pollution. I was no longer alone because I was abandoned. I was alone because I was the only inhabitant of my own world being rediscovered. The loneliness, which had been my punishment, was slowly transforming into solitude, my reward.
Months passed, sliding over each other like white lines on the road. The seasons changed around me. The golden autumn of Utah gave way to a mild winter in southern Arizona. Now, with spring starting to warm the air, I found my way to one of the quietest places on earth, Monument Valley. I parked the Wanderer at an isolated spot, with an unobstructed view of the majestic rock formations rising from the desert floor like monuments to a forgotten time. Life inside the trailer took on its own rhythm, a routine as natural as sunrise and sunset. I wake with the first light, make strong coffee on my old gas stove, and sit on the trailer steps, watching the long morning shadows slowly retreat across the valley. The days are filled with small tasks, a hike, a repair on the trailer, reading a paperback bought from a used bookstore. There's no rush, no schedule, no one I have to answer to. The logbook continues, its pages now filled with more than just mechanical notes. They're clumsy sketches of rock formations and notes about constellations I learned to identify. It's the map of an inner journey, much more detailed than any road map. The other day, while organizing a box of belongings, I found the old photo of Helen and me. I looked at the smiling faces, the young people full of a dream that now seemed to belong to someone else. I didn't feel the sharp stab of pain from before, just a distant sadness, the kind of sadness you feel for a friend you lost long ago. I put the photo in the box, along with the folded maps of our planned trip, and placed it at the bottom of a cupboard. Not to forget, but to acknowledge that chapter was finally closed. I look at the horizon, at the imposing silhouettes against the infinite sky. I lost the woman I loved, the house I built, and the future I spent 40 years planning. It was a devastating loss. But here, in the desert silence, I realized what I gained in return. I gained the sunrise just for myself. I gained the sound of the wind as my only companion. I gained the freedom to not have a destination. And for the first time in my life, I gained the right to be on the road, not because I needed to get somewhere, but simply because the road was my home, and the whole horizon now belongs to me.